My name is Allison, and I'm from an infrastructure company, Mott MacDonald, so a slightly different take on perhaps some of the proceedings here. And in good traditions, I would sort of like to make 3 points as well. The first one, actually, probably in essence, totally covered already by Michael, and that we live in an age of increasing demand on investment. We live in an age of quite substantive population growth. We live in an age of substantive social development where everybody wants a better tomorrow than they have today. And allied these two things together, we are seeing unprecedented levels of infrastructure investment. So we want better and we want it more. And overlaying these two drivers of more and better, we are increasingly seeing the impacts of climate change. So an exacerbating effect that we've got a lot of money to spend, we need to get it right, and we've got this variable and relative uncertainty of how severe some of these climate change impacts are going to be. It's reasonably well documented that already we look at the current day of round about 100 billion per annum of economic losses due to climate effects. Not necessarily climate change, but climate effects. And against the worsening climatic situation and the level of investment in assets, then there's a prediction that will rise over the next 2 to 3 decades to something like $1 trillion per annum. Now, that's an awful lot of money if you're only talking about spending $3 to $4 trillion per annum on infrastructure investment. So a key point here is, and Michael's already said, that in no sense is 2 degrees C already guaranteed as a global increase. The climate change impacts from the 1 degree that we already have, and whether we make 2, 2.7, 3.74, and all these numbers are in the press, the climate change impacts are real now and are already going to have to be dealt with by every country, not just in the developing world. And one aspect that we would see to look to come out of COP21 is a real affirmation of the role of the private sector in this. Not just the funding of government money to fund the developing countries in the north to south flow, but actually the role of industry per se and the private sector per se in tackling these things. So that's a long first point. The other 2 points are much shorter. One of the difficulties that we have in our current age with our modern infrastructure is that we live in a system of service delivery where we have systems of systems. Our systems for delivering services to the population become increasingly complex. They become increasingly interconnected. We have one service relying on the performance of another. So our electricity generation relies on our telecoms and IT industries, etc. So we have a situation of increasing complexity where interconnection between services is tending towards over-reliance on one another. And we have to be careful in increasing urbanized society that we don't create solutions which increase vulnerability to some of the climate effects. The point 3 is very much simpler, and one couldn't resist it because these statements were made only in the building opposite, in the Lloyd's building, about a month ago, by one of those people who is not necessarily seen as a particularly stand-up comedian in these things, and this was Mark Carney. And Mark Carney made some very, very affirmatory comments about the dangers that he saw in front of us in terms of climate change. And he made a very clever plea in his speech to the audience saying, well, the far-sighted amongst you will recognize these things, understand these things, and already be planning for it, leaving it to the audience to decide whether they were far-sighted enough. But I think that speech in Lloyd's building to essentially the insurance industry was affirming that there is still a window of opportunity to do something about this, but that window is closing pretty quickly.